Peace. Love and Life family, it's your girl Morgan Renee Myers tuning in with another reading of the book Complementarity, Thoughts for African Warrior Couples by Baba Mwalimu K. Bomani Baruti. I'm going to hop right in it. I am now on chapter 7, and this chapter is entitled Sex. It starts off with a quote by Kwame Agye and Akua Nson Akoto, and it reads, "A whore, male or female, is incapable of the focused and discriminating commitment to companion and children that viable families require." Wow, that came off real strong. Let me read that again. Now let me do a quick review of the titles of the chapters we've read so far. The first chapter was Complementarity. Chapter 2 was Choices. Chapter 3 was Trust. Chapter 4 was Love and Happiness. Chapter 5 was Vision. Chapter 6 was Marriage. We're on chapter 7 now, Sex. And then chapter 8 will be Procreativity. 9 will be Family. 10 will be Rearing Warriors. And so I really like that this book is focused on family in general and relationships between African peoples. I really value that is the root topic being focused on. So I'm going to read that quote again and get started with chapter 7. A whore, male or female, is incapable of the focused and discriminating commitment to companion and children that viable families require. Complementarity means that acts of sex are not abusive, selfish, or quantitative. They are not destructive, domineering. So when you read, especially if you're not too sure of definitions, that'd be a great time to look it up. So quantitative, that means quantity, right? So sex is not about the amount of times that you have sex with your partner. It's not abusive. It's not like the stuff we see. And it shouldn't be selfish. Okay. Complementarity means that acts of sex are not abusive, selfish, or quantitative. They are not destructive, domineering, or submissive. They cannot follow European practices because European sexual thought and behavior are naturally anti-complementarity and anti-family. He's been talking about that all throughout the book. We have this European mindset and ways that we do things and think about things because that's what we've been taught. But as an African warrior, that's the total opposite of how we originally should operate. European sexual relationships are abusive, selfish, and quantitative. This is even and especially the case among Africans who see their experimentation with European sexual practices as above race and culture, because they believe sex is separate from and above race and culture. In any thought or act, Africans who see themselves as above themselves are sadly mistaken. All who embrace European cultural imperatives, whether sexual or not, whether selectively or not, will be carried deeper and deeper into a greater participation and defense of their increasing insanity. Who is this Abdul Hamid, honey? You about to get blocked if you don't go somewhere. All who embrace European cultural imperatives, whether sexual or not, whether selectively or not, will be carried deeper and deeper into a greater participation and defense of their increasing insanity. Do not be confused. European peculiarities, this is a tongue twister. European peculiarities. European peculiarities cannot be universalized. To do so will be to make the abnormal normal. Because we have been trained to interpret our traditions through the mind of the European, we find it difficult to even consider as possibilities sexual paradigms or practices which do not fit within the framework of the European sexual imperative. We find it difficult to operate without embracing excess or considering that what falls outside universal order could be perversion, because we have become so attached to being orgasmically satisfied that constraint is virtually impossible. We have become so dependent on the physical and material for our basic satisfaction in life that any rules or guidelines that curtail our individualized, rampant, directionless ecstasy or sexual accumulation are seen as a threat to our life and well-being. We believe we came to this way of our own mind. Sadly, most of us, even many nationalists, are not yet prepared to dedicate even some of that invaluable energy into nation-building activities. Because we have become so Europeanized out of our African self, we refuse to accept fault for what we do in aping them. And even when we do, our confusion has drained us of the ability to think about changing back into what we once were, morally uncorrupted sexual beings. One aspect of the sexual obsession that we have adopted and come to defend with our very sanity is that of never being satisfied sexually. And in order to universalize this obsession in our effort to mentally be integrated with abnormality and make that abnormality just normal human behavior, we have even bought into its fabrication as a universal biological drive. But excess is not a biological function, as some political scientists proclaim. The constant need for sexual gratification is a socialized, psychological response to an enormous collection of environmental, material, and non-material, human and otherwise, stimuli deeply tied into the insatiability of the European cultural personality. One can never have enough of anything within it. However, we cannot confuse the unnatural with the natural. Nature is fully in sync with nature. So, if the need for sex were truly only based on its biological function, and if women had babies as often as humanly possible, at minimum, the natural biological drive to have sex will only occur when it became time to become pregnant. But that is far from the case in a society where we, following the Europeans' footsteps, blame nature on our excesses. Let me reread that, because that sounds like, you know how we like to compare ourselves to animals a lot, or have these animalistic desires and urges and things like that. Let me reread to make sure I'm clear on what he's saying. However, we cannot confuse the unnatural, which is what he's saying our sex culture is now, the need to always have. We can't confuse the unnatural with the natural of how it's really supposed to go down without all this extra influence. Okay. Nature is fully in sync with nature. We are a part of nature. So if nature or animals can be in sync, we as humans can be in sync. So if the need for sex were truly only based on its biological function, and if women had babies as often as humanly possible, at minimum, the natural biological drive to have sex will only occur when it became time to become pregnant. But that ain't in the West. People get urges outside of just when they want to procreate. And also, women have a clitoris. What is a clitoris there for with all them good feelings if it's not supposed to be tapped upon for pleasure? But that is far from the case in a society where we, following the Europeans' footsteps, blame nature on our excesses. Since when do their scientific journals, fashion magazines, and talk shows determine normal biological sexual urges? Their sexual reason knows no boundaries or limitations, and we become accomplices in the very dangerous game of playing creator when we do not confront their manipulation of science, which redefines what is an abnormal sexual appetite as natural and universal. So there he's saying, you know, with all the technology, the fashion magazines, the talk about sex, the showcasing of sex, it's just constantly be putting in front of us and making us desire it when that is not our natural. Okay. He said this is not and the sexual reason knows no boundaries or limitations, and we become accomplices in the very dangerous game of playing creator when we do not confront their manipulation of science, which redefines what is abnormal sexual appetite and natural and universal. Generally speaking, even after centuries of sexual assault, their peculiar excesses and perversions still disproportionately mark them, not us. For traditional African complement, sexual intercourse is a sacred spiritual act. This should not be a complicated conceptualization for African complements living in the here and now who see themselves in proud pursuit of the traditions of their ancestors who understood the meaning in things. Tradition is our all in all. Traditional does not mean archaic, outdated, outmoded, primitive, backward, useless. In the case of the African, however, it unequivocally means non-European. Tradition symbolizes that which has come to work. It speaks to what has come to work successfully for a people through extensive intergenerational trial and error and communion with the universe. This means tens of thousands of years of deep thought among African people. Only that which is tried and true stands the cultural test of time. Only those who remain stuck in the belief that another's sexual traditions and theirs remain confused beyond the ability to return to their moral source. For serious thinkers, it is in the African tradition that our way of sex will be found, not in the hot pursuits of other extremes and perversions. It may be hard to change old habits and ingrained ways of thinking. For some, it is even harder to be different, i.e., be African in a European place, and get over the contradiction that makes anything except that which is African an act of individualism in a highly individualistic culture. But we are in the process of re-Africanization, a movement that naturally must move us against and away from the European way. Besides, any virtue worth our time is worth the struggle required to attain and internalize it. To move in this direction, all we truly need know is that sex carries a powerful spiritual value among traditional African complements. We can easily make sense of this in that sex is the single most important procreative act, and Africans who modeled their way after the universe knew that, above all else, the universe is about procreation. Nonetheless, this is not the place or time to give instructions on sexual practices because most of us still have not yet got up the nerve to become African. Instructions are wasteful if the pupil is not willing to think about listening. If we had the nerve, we would naturally feel compelled to question everything we do as individuals in the Western society. We would even be intelligent enough to question those continental African experts who Europeans now so freely promote and publish as our traditional sexual gurus because we know that menticide among Africans is a global phenomenon. Moreover, our questions about our Europeanized thought and behavior will go beyond simply religion. Lost my place. And attire. Moreover, our questions about our Europeanized thought and behavior would go beyond simply religion and attire. They will call everything that we do as European shadows into question. It will lead us on a deeply determined search for our ancestral traditional way. It will lead us to moderation in an order that will break us from the drive to explore strange new worlds of sexual confusion and degeneracy. Caution will be our guide. If we are not they, then we should not do what they have historically done. And of all things, they should not invade the most private of places, our bedrooms. Baba Barusi is saying we doing sex all wrong. We over-sexualize. We following what the Europeans do. We're not being intentional of it being a sacred spiritual act. And the sole purpose is to procreate or to create life continuously. We're not being intentional about that because we're so caught up in not being pleased and or always having a need to have it. Just can't not have it. That reminds me of one of the lines in one of my poems in my book, The Celibacy Chronicles. Had to have it was never not an option. Just multiple choices of boys' numbers in my phone. Who would get a ring today? Certainly not me. A future possibility wasn't enough to be waiting around on something not guaranteed. And to be honest, I don't know if marriage is cut out for me. Because based on what I see, all men desire more than one woman will make a vow to you and still cheat. If not physically, mentally, or emotionally. And in cases where fake love is put on the show for so long, I'd rather remain free. Pick and choose who brings pleasure to me. Lord. He's saying we got sex all wrong. And that it can be difficult to try to retrain your brain, re-Africanize yourself because we're in this menticide. We've been taught so many lies and just so much from birth in this Western Eurocentric mindset that it's hard to go back to your African self when you're being told that you should not have all these need to explore and be super active sexually, especially if that's something that you enjoy, have done, or trying to get delivered from. Interesting. So chapter 8, I'm going to go on and read this, is entitled Procreativity, and it starts off with a quote by Anthony Ephraim Donker. But if the human being is a spiritual being and has an ideal domicile in the ancestral world, then why will it decide to live in a less than ideal milieu? Well, let me look these words up. What is a domicile? Hold on. Domicile.
Here's the definition of domicile. Formal. The country that a person treats as their permanent home, or lives in and has a substantial connection with.
Okay. But if the human being is a spiritual being and has an ideal domicile, or a country that a person treats as a permanent home or has a substantial connection with, if the human being is a spiritual being and has an ideal, substantial connection with the ancestral world, then why will it decide to live in a less than ideal milieu? Let me see how you pronounce that. I don't even know how to say it. M-I-L-I-E-U. Milieu. That ain't how you pronounce it. A person's social environment. He grew up in a military milieu. Okay. But if the human being is a spiritual being and has an ideal domicile or strong connection with the ancestral world, then why will it decide to live in a less than ideal environment? Okay. Milieu. We must understand that ethical existence and generativity is practiced in the mundane. In fact, the only way to become a spiritual personality is to be a human being first, since one cannot achieve ancestorhood until the person has been born, lived, died, and resurrected as a spiritual personality. Yo, this just, wow. I love what reading can do sometimes for your brain. This just made me think, I've been posting stuff, talking my shit about how, well, first of all, I understand that we're spiritual beings having a human experience, but I've spoken with some people and I asked them, like, they say that they're not religious, but they're spiritual. And then, you ask, like, well, what do you, from the outside looking in, from my perspective, it's like, I don't feel like just waking up, getting on your phone or getting on technology, going to work, and just coming home and doing that all again, like, not really, I don't feel like not tuning in, not taking no quiet time to just sit and breathe and be with yourself, and think about, your relationship with a higher power or not. Like, in my opinion, I don't see how you're spiritual. Just because you stop going to church and you realize you may not agree or understand some things about the Bible or Jesus, or you don't like the hubbub and the preachers and the tithes and all that extra stuff, that, to me, just saying, oh, I denounce Christianity or religion, don't make you spiritual in my eyes. I feel like spiritual is intentional. It's intentional focus time. But anyways, just reading that little excerpt made me think of, like, when we do think about Jesus or even other people in the history of different religions, you have this idea of a person that came, they were super righteous, or they gave a lot of energy and did a lot of good, and then they died and then they resurrected or they were reborn. And I feel like that's kind of what the journey of spirituality feels like. Like, we come into this world where, especially if you're born over here in America, we're westernized, we're European-centric thinking. And then we grow up in this world, and then it's like you might have some occurrences where you are really getting to know yourself or your history or your roots. And so it's like you have this change, the shedding of skin, this caterpillar, butterfly type of experience. And I feel like that's all spirituality really is. It's like coming to know oneself, and being more analytical will help you with your elevation, because you can see things differently. You can trust your intuition more now. You can manifest and and think thoughts and hear a response or get a feeling in your soul and just know to go do something, especially if it's like super crazy, something you never thought to do. Like, I feel like that's all spirituality is this reshedding, and that's all Jesus and everybody else represented. This coming, this pureness, this energy, and then this death, this resurrection, this reincarnation, this rebirth of who you are. That's what I feel like life is. It's just a journey back to spirit. Beautiful. All right. In fact, the only way to become a spiritual personality is to be a human being first, since one cannot achieve ancestorhood until the person has been born, lived, died, and resurrected as a spiritual personality. The world then is the testing ground for ethical existence and generativity, the sole criterion for judgment in the ancestral world. What will a spirit be without first manifesting itself among the living? It will have no name and could not be invoked by the living for any reason or purpose because it does not exist. Okay, quote. Start the chapter off right. The universe models family. It is the ultimate family. Productivity through procreation is its way. Throughout it, the male and female reproduce more males and females. The African family is the universe in microcosm. So naturally, procreation is how we regenerate ourselves generation after generation throughout all time. Without procreation, we cease to exist as a productive force within the universe. Without procreation, we die. This being the case, for us in this here and now, the only question is of when to have children. In our current menticidal state, when is a question of the consciousness and maturity of those who have chosen to conceive. For having and rearing children is an enormous responsibility which requires one to be prepared to continuously be prepared. Further complicating the racial, cultural assault against us is capitalism. In capitalist systems, success in individualistic consumption weighs greater than success in producing children because they are seen as contributing nothing of material value to the family's income, yet they consume so much. In a world where value is measured materialistically and quantitatively, they are viewed as being little more than parasitic showpieces, greedily consuming whatever productive energy their parents have left to expend after working to pay for what they consume. When procreation is promoted by Europeans for Europeans, it is only in reactive fear for racial survival. It is only the purpose of staving off genetic annihilation. Under normal conditions in European society, success is primarily measured in things, in accumulation, in material and or financial wealth, not offspring, friends, or family. See that? In the European mindset, in Western society, America, we focus our value and success off of the things you have, the money you have, the house, the cars, the pool, the this, the that, all the excess showy stuff that you can show that you're living your best life. But it's really talked about how like the value of your friendships, of your family, of your bond, of your connection with people, of having loved ones and people you can depend on and go to for comfort and just have a festive time with. That's not as valuable as, okay, we can all have a good time and vibe, but if we ain't got nowhere to stay, if we can't pay our bills, if we don't have money in the bank, then all of that is for naught. And that is why I feel like I don't fit here anymore, because that's not the lifestyle I want to live. I want to live a communal life with people, and we're sharing and bartering and trading and using all our skills amongst one another. And it's not about whether or not you got $10 million or if you got do you got 10 oranges, sister? Because that's what I'm gonna need. I need the nourishment. I don't really need this paper. But when you're in a capitalist society, you gotta learn how to play the game. So under normal conditions in European society, success is primarily measured in things, in accumulation and material and or financial wealth, not offspring, friends, or family. Procreation among supremacists is for no reason other than to ensure intergenerational dominance. You hear that? White people have kids for intergenerational dominance so that they can, one, stay alive, but also control the wealth. If we can keep this up, we can keep things running. If we let them take over and unify, and there'll be no more of us. Africans seeking European cultural validation and power naturally follow suit. Everything and anything they will improve and ensure their chances of success are tackled before planning and bringing our families into existence. Whether it be acquiring academic credentials, climbing the corporate ladder, having significant real estate holdings, world travel, developing our social portfolio, or accumulating sufficient stock to feel secure, material and financial wealth is their primary goal. When children enter the picture, the competition becomes over what will take the greatest priority over their time. Will it be family, meaning spouse and children, or will it be a semblance of a Western worker's precarious self-sufficiency? Even though we know that there will never be any real security for Africans in white supremacist capitalist systems, most of us dearly hold onto this highly individualistic dream. That being the case, the latter option tends to win out. Capitalism, built on an ideology of scarcity, produces selfish individuals who have no choice but to be anti-family if they are to be considered successful. Meaning, I will put off having children until I'm able to reach this corporate standpoint or finances, because it's harder to take care of them without it. Whereas the African principle is, if you have sex and you procreate, that child is supposed to be here, and we all help each other. But you can't do that in a capitalistic society. In the final analysis, however, we must remember that capitalism is not really to blame. Economic systems do not just appear out of the blue while those subject to them become their victims and operative zombies. A people produce an economic order in their own image. As Amos N. Wilson reminded us, an economy at its very foundation is how people have determined to relate to each other. Hard currency only facilitates these relationships through an ordered exchange of the goods and services they need to be themselves. Economic orders deeply reflect the cultural personality of the people who create them. Europeans are capitalists by nature. This, again, brings us back to the question of Africans caught up in the European capitalist economic order and its relationship to their procreativity. Those of us who still, consciously or unconsciously, embrace the procreative tradition of our ancestors are caught between a rock and a hard place. The selfish drive to individualistically and conspicuously consume, and the desire to have and rear children. This sometimes uncomfortable position is further exasperated by a socialization that encourages the maintenance of a childish mentality for life. So many of us who are caught up in this dilemma, either as Europeans have historically done, procreate and leave the rearing responsibilities to other family or non-family members, or procreate and survive as disinterested and irresponsible parents until the children are old enough to fend for themselves, whether still living in the home or not. The alternative, in keeping with our nation-building agenda, is to responsibly have and rear children into their power as Africans. Where is my highlighter? To responsibly. The alternative, in keeping with our nation-building agenda, is to responsibly have and rear children into the power into their power as Africans. That should be our true goal. Children are sacred, and they are the most vulnerable members of the community. As their parents, guardians, and community, we should act accordingly. I like that. That should be our true goal. Children are sacred. They are the most vulnerable members of our community. As their parents, guardians, and community, we should act accordingly. Even so, that does not take away from the fact that most of us are incorrectly socialized into a childish adulthood and are not ready to have children, even when we say we are. It does not take away from the fact that most of us are not, and in all probability will never be, financially secure within the years when we are physically and emotionally best suited to take on the responsibilities of rearing children. So again, we must decide which is the priority, and if we choose correctly, how to go about being successful, procreative Africans. On the point of procreative maturity, Francis Cress Welsing has proposed the solution that could, in the long run, produce generations of increasingly stronger and more determined African warrior scholars. She should She suggests that there's a logical relationship between age and maturity for Africans battling for their sanity in Western culture. And this is a quote from Frances Cress Welsing. Further, if black people are ever to evolutionize their situation from oppression to justice and liberation, they will have to shift their present patterns of behavior radically such that marriage will not be considered before the age of 30. In keeping with this approach, childbearing should not be considered before the age of 32 to 35. This will provide both parents sufficient opportunity to maximize levels of emotional maturity and to work to overcome deficits experienced in emotional development during their own early years. That's a good idea because I've actually heard that like most men aren't really ready and prepared to take on a family until about 35. It's like that's, women mature a little faster than men, so it's like that's kind of their curve where like they've kind of got the hang of it now. And they also usually are a little more advanced in their career and their life experience, and it's just a better place than trying to be a 22-year-old dad, you know what I mean? So I don't think that's a bad advice. Don't consider marriage before the age of 30, and don't consider children before the age of 32 to 35. Interesting. I'm not going to argue with the quality of intent behind her proposed solution to the problem of African male and female immaturity relative to age at marriage and procreation. Her primary concern, as it should be, is with our children. Ignorant and immature parents cannot raise their or anyone else's children into conscious and mature adults. Let me highlight that. Ignorant and immature parents cannot raise their or anyone else's children into conscious and mature adults. Oh, I'm going to quote that on my Facebook when I get done. Based on a self-determining African nation's need for mature adults engaged in growing together and rearing strong, deeply conscious warrior sons and daughters, Cress Welsing's prescriptions are most logical and sound given our current level of menticide and socioeconomic state. There is an enormous amount of evidence to support her program. Looking at only one example of the insanity rife in our community, especially at the younger childbearing ages, provides ample evidence of the magnitude of this problem. So many of our youth and adults are hell-bent on abusing their bodies through drugs and alcohol while at the same time inadvertently procreating our future. And we should know that alcohol and drugs are very much a part of the Western mating sex ritual. I remember there was a time where I would only want to have sex when I was drunk or high. I didn't want to have sober sex. Damn, that's a Western mating ritual. We should also know that most pregnancies in this society are not planned. While not heaping blame on them because they did not raise themselves and they did not create the environment which controls them, their menticidal carelessness nonetheless is helping to create an African future even more intensely dominated by our enemies. Let's see if I can pronounce this name. Kimbwandinde Kia Binseku Fukia provides a dramatic and thought-provoking analysis of what the effects of what we could call the drunk gene are on the children of these youth. And his quote says, alcohol and drugs involve the entirety of the body being invaded by these substances, including one's reproductive cells. When an inebriated individual forces his partner to make love, resulting in pregnancy, without doubt, the child will be born alcoholic because he and she was conceived in that state. That state of mind mistakenly determined the child's genetic package. As adults, one knows what alcohol does to an individual who is drunk. Can you imagine the state of an infant yet in the womb who may be daily, weekly, or even monthly made drunk? Have you ever experienced a headache caused by alcohol? Can you imagine the same pain in an infant of 3 months and still in the womb? We know that this not only disturbs but destroys the developmental states of the infant and weakens his individual self-healing power. Wow. Is that deep? That shook me up, y'all. A lot of people like to have sex under the influence. Hell, I loved it. Wow. So if you have drunk sex and you get pregnant, that baby was conceived in drunkenness, and therefore it weakens their ability to self-heal because that's the state that they're in. Soon, if a plan like Cress-Welsing's is not put into place, this desecration could become the norm among forthcoming generations. However, keeping in mind the spirit of her plan, we should consider at least 3 interrelated critical points that may serve to encourage a meaningful debate that will modify it but not remove its utility. First, those Africans who are potential complements and procreators need to develop viable tools for measuring their mates and their own maturity from an African-centered perspective. An ability to handle the responsibilities of provision, protection, and nurturance do not necessarily move one in the direction of African nation building. This requires a degree of committed consciousness not easily come by, and experience with individuals at all ages should inform us that age has little bearing on mentality or maturity that places family above self in the Western society. Second, given the progressive spoiling of our children and therefore the older age at which they potentially mature is 32 to 35, really old enough? And if it is much older, given the shorter average lifespan of Africans in this reality, will a later procreation defeat the purpose of in-house nation building because the parents will be physically and emotionally because the parents will not physically and emotionally be capable of effectively dealing with a child's energy? It is also important to note that parenting does not end once the child legally becomes an adult. The emotional, counseling, and often financial responsibilities continue throughout life. And the longer these supports are there for our children, the better. With the average African males and females life expectancy sitting somewhere around 66 and 74, often preceded by years of serious health issues and or infirmity, respectively, having children in the mid-30s only allows about 13 to 21 years of support for one's children once they reach the age of 18. It essentially removes the possibility of grandparenting if the children follow the same procreative trajectory. Wisdom becomes lost. It has neither time to develop nor a bridge to cross from one life to the next. Obviously, based on this thinking, our children must be taught mature and responsible thought and behavior early enough in life so that they will be emotionally mature and independently intelligent enough to create viable families in their late teens through mid-20s. To attack the problem source and not its symptoms would be to rear our children into mature, responsible young adults rather than raising the age at which social pressure or panic over a biological clock, which can present serious fertility, childbearing, health problems for the woman, will force them to unwillingly and still incompetently become so. And third, historically speaking, Africans embark on bearing and rearing children as soon as they are able to marry and have them. They do this when they are strongest and best able to provide the attention to the details of marriage and childbearing that creating African families needs. Having children is a much sought after honor that reflects their love and dedication to themselves, the community, and the Creator. Through bringing children into the physical realm of spirit, they complete the ongoing cycle of life that includes the living, the ancestors, and those yet to be born. Offspring complete the cycle of life by bringing energy back from the ancestral realm. Through giving birth and taking the best care of the gift they receive in their offspring, they actively participate in their responsibility to fulfill their mission of contributing to life. Children are desired because they are valued in and of themselves, not because they somehow form some social, economic, or political asset for their producers and therefore are subconsciously identified as something separate from them. They are sought because they are an expression of a genuine love for life and epitomize all that is and of the universe. Based on these considerations, we can see that within Welsing's proposal, there may be misplaced priorities and that her solution operates under the assumption that we are trying to force fit African people into a European reality where children are a secondary consideration in the development of family. It unwittingly operates within the premise that the European ordering of social priorities is the only and most viable option. Yes, economic stability is an accepted requirement in any society, given diverse, culturally informed definitions of what material quantity qualifies as basic economic stability for the creation of family. But the emotional maturity of prospective African parents will not be corrected by raising the age at which they may have a chance to stumble upon maturity. Okay, so he's kind of saying that Francis Cress Welding saying that you shouldn't think about marriage until 30 and think about procreating between 32 and 35. He's saying that, trying to wait until you're at a financially stable place should not be the motivation, because that is still European thought. But he is stating that maturity is an important part, and that if you are already putting family above self, that you're already... you don't necessarily need to wait to an age, because your thinking is already on your family. Okay. So, but the emotional maturity of prospective African parents will not be corrected by raising the age at which they may have a chance to stumble upon maturity. Neither will it automatically give them an African center. These necessary preconditions for any nation-building warrior's mind are very unlikely to happen in and of themselves. This is obvious if for no other reason than increasing numbers of African children in Western society are being raised to remain childlike until they expire from old age. And this has increased the probability that an African child will be reared correctly has diminished, because increasing numbers of new parents have no knowledge of those childbearing practices which naturally produce serious, intelligent adults. Again, instead of raising the age, we must address the issue of faulty child raising. We must correct how we are raising our children so that maturity will not just be a function of accident or circumstance. They must be put on the road to maturity from birth. So not having drunk sex will be step one, according to what we just read. It is on the question of what age procreation should be encouraged that most African-centered warrior scholars tend to carry the greatest apprehension about Cress Welding's proposal. First, because it does not take into account that economic success and a progressive maturing personality development for Africans within the European social and cultural context is extremely problematic. And secondly, it advocates an extreme deviation from a traditional African norm, a norm of children first, to which all our intellectual exercises should be determined to lead us. In the end, we know that in our effort to procreatively re-Africanize ourselves, there will be various guidelines proposed to set standards for marriage and procreation in order to rectify our current family dilemmas. The credible ones will be based on our historically grounded scientific evaluations of the general level of comprehension, appreciation, and application of the African tradition evident among our people. Only within that framework can political, economic context, and individual maturity be used as the determining and defining characteristics of who should do what and when. So that is the end of chapter 8, which was procreativity. Chapter 7 was sex. So if you just tuned in, you gotta start the video from the beginning to catch chapter 7. He's saying some interesting things, and I think all of this, whether we agree with everything he's saying or not, in chapter 7 he was speaking on sex and how we're really Europeanized and westernizing our thinking of it, the need to always have it, the not being satisfied with it, are all European ways and not of the African way. But I do think being mindful of who you procreate with, having conversations with the people that you're having sex with, like there have been so many times where people don't even really talk or know much of anything about each other. It's just kind of like bam, 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 and then a baby, and then you realize, oh, well, they were not an astute person, they're not around, and you got this baby mama drama and all that crap, because it's like, y'all didn't take time to get to know anything about each other. You just wanted to, and now the child is here, and that's great. We need children, but we also need healthy parents to raise them. So my nephew's waking up. He was a product of sex. So I will tune in with y'all later. I thank y'all for tuning in, and check in with y'all again soon. Peace.